So I grew up in Michigan, was born in Phoenix, and spent about 5 years there, which were very like tumultuous years. Because my birth father was someone who had a very rough childhood, was abused when he was a child, learning disability, and was not a high school graduate, and he lived with substance use disorder, so alcoholism, drug use, marijuana was like something that was the way that he dealt with his anxiety, and he was also in trouble with the law a lot. So he was in and out of jail during those really early years.
Yeah, when you were little?
When I was little, yeah. So all that time when we were in Arizona, I didn't see him a lot. I have a couple like vague memories of him. Some good ones too. He was, despite all of his challenges, he was a very resourceful person, very resilient. He would, do interesting things to like help our family get by, find things in alleys and, sell things at swap meets and stuff like that. He made me this bike. This is one of the like vivid memories that I have from when I was little, is this bike that he made that was like an amalgamation of a bunch of different bike parts. And
really?
Yeah, it had a banana seat and it was green, and
it was like a Frankenstein bike.
It was such a Frankenstein bike, totally. And I remember that was like my pride and joy. But he also, was like so addicted to alcohol that my mom was kind of required to buy beer before groceries. So he was like, drank a case of beer, and that was his thing, So anyway, it's one of those things where the environment created a lot of anxiety for all of us. I mean, one of my earliest memories was going to visit him in the jail.
Wow.
So
what was that like? Because you were probably how old were you?
Well, so I was 4. My mom said, so my mom told me recently that I was 4 the first time that I visited him in jail, and then the last time was probably closer to 6.
And you remember going?
And I remember going to visit that intake process. So what's interesting is recently I was down in Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and I was presenting my 5 Bridges wellness system to a group of inmates at the Abington Regional Jail there. And when I was going through that process of, going into the jail, where you have to, take out your personal possessions and set them aside, and you go through metal detector, and then, you go in, and this big, heavy metal door just slams behind you. And I had like a flashback to when I was little, and that feeling of anxiety rising inside of you. It was really interesting.
That is interesting.
So, but then we, our whole family moved from Arizona to Michigan, and for a lot of us it was a positive thing because I think it was a change. But for my dad, it was kind of leaving behind some support systems that he had, his AA pals, the church that he went to, and some things that were really keeping him stable. And then he and my mom split up, and that was for him, I think, kind of the final straw of losing that stability that he had had. And from there, things went downhill really quickly for him, and he spiraled into using some heavier drugs and became very depressed. During that time, it was, we would get calls from the cops, that he was found drunk someplace, or, he was in jail, or sometimes he would show up, on our doorstep at 3 a.m., drunk and that sort of thing. The last time that we kind of heard from him, was right before he died. And it was kind of manic and disorganized and, very, just kind of he was in a very heightened state, and so the call that we got after that was he had been found dead by suicide. And, it was just such a shame, that's how things ended up, that he was, in so much pain and he couldn't see any other way out. That was just the only solution that he had. So, and of course, for our young family, it was my mom, she had me when she was 20 years old. So she was just 26 when he died. And I was 6, my sister was 5, and my brother was 3. So, very young family and just basically in survival mode. That's all we could do. There weren't resources. There wasn't counseling and trying to find constructive ways through it. It was like, you survive. We have to eat, and we have to just make it day to day. So I think that created this this environment where just being in survival mode all the time, anxiety, and a lot of anger for me. I was a very angry little boy, because I felt abandoned. I really, being the oldest, kind of stepped into this man of the house role, even though I was 6 years old, and, so I resented him a lot, and I had a lot of anger with the world, a lot of fear. I was constantly afraid that someone else was going to die, that we were going to be left in that state again. So I was worried a lot. And then as that anxiety grew, it turned inward, and that fear became about my own health. And I became very anxious about, that I had some sort of a disease. I had cancer or, brain disease, or my heart was bad, or, things like that. And I started having physical symptoms from it as well. I started having stomach pains and dizzy spells and, what now I know to be anxiety manifesting itself physically in my body, and actually having physical symptoms of anxiety.
Well, isn't that something they say about, it sounds like there was like a little bit of hypochondria in there, which I feel like I have a little bit of as well, but what they'll say that is that at a certain point, you start to see these symptoms of things that you think are there. And in your case, it was probably more anxiety induced. Yeah. But so like throughout your life, you say that you were dealing with this anxiety. You were saying like depression as well. I mean, how was that for you throughout your life? Because you were only 6 when that happened, which is horrible. So what was it like, being a teenager or a young adult?
Yeah, I mean, so pretty much still like that state of survival, that survival mode really just stuck. And even though, after time, my mom met my stepdad, who is my dad, and, got remarried, and he brought a very stable element to our lives, very hard worker and, a loving man. And even so, I was still in that state of anxiety, that, kind of perpetual fight or flight mode, because I never learned different.
Because that's a hard thing to get over.
Yeah, and those, adverse childhood experiences or early childhood trauma, when you experience it, it literally rewrites your brain. It reprograms the way that you think. And so those neural pathways that are carved so deep just become a default behavior, And so I was constantly walking around like with every single muscle just tight, and physically it was living in my bodies. Our muscles have memory. So all of that trauma was living in there constantly. So that, of course, translated to my behavior. I was, the class clown. I was always getting in trouble. I couldn't concentrate in school. I was never, mentally present. A lot of times I was in my own head, because I was anxious about what was going on in my body, and so school was something that I had to do. School, was not something that I enjoyed. I was not good at it. Not to say that I wasn't intelligent, but I didn't have those basic building blocks, arithmetic and grammar, and those sorts of things. And so when you miss some of that early stuff and you're trying to build on it progressively through school, it was difficult for me. And so I just used that as an excuse to just mess around even more. And so I was the kid that was, I was always in trouble, put out in the hallway as punishment or sent down to the principal's office. That was just, I was that kid. But I was also, someone who I think recognized at an early age that what I was experiencing wasn't normal.
So you knew that? I
knew that there was something different about me. Now, I thought that there was something, physically wrong with me, right? And so, and even once my mom took me to the doctor to, run a battery of tests, and they hooked me up to, a Holter monitor to monitor my heart and electrodes, and I ran on a treadmill and all this stuff to try to figure out what was wrong with me. They drew blood, and there was nothing wrong with me. I was a perfectly healthy young man as far as my physical health. But of course, this is the 80s, and they're not saying I wonder what might be going on psychologically, and digging into it from that direction. So, it went unaddressed. And I felt like a freak, because I had these feelings, I had these thoughts, I had all this worry, and no one else did, So I kind of created this world where I explained it as that I was some sort of human experiment, that I had been cooked up in a lab, and they had, of course, my mom didn't know about it. No one knew about it except for these people. So there was sort of a paranoia that happened there, where I felt like I was being experimented on. Do you mean
that's what you actually thought, or this was something that?
I thought that for a period of my life. I always try to remember which years, because it's, as I say, I time traveled through a lot of my youth, so I don't know exactly when, but there is a period. I remember one specific time, being in the basement, and that's where my room was, and that's where my bathroom was, and I knew there was someone looking through a hole and watching me.
Wow.
I just knew it, and I was, and so I took the cabinet, the bathroom cabinet, off the wall to see if there was cameras or wires and stuff behind it, So definitely some paranoia and some disordered thinking, and because I knew that I was so different and so, just unlike everyone else, I wore a mask. I pretended, and I put on this persona for everyone else, that what I thought was normal, what other people were like, or what other people wanted me to be like. And in this way, I kind of learned how to be a human. I learned how to be a regular person. So you think that actually
helped?
I think it ended up helping because, it was almost like a character study, right? Where I went through this process of looking at other people and seeing, what did those people do that is, makes them liked or popular or whatever it is. And so I started copying those behaviors, and it worked. you know, and I became someone who, you know, became popular, and I got involved in sports, and I had friends and girls who liked me, and, you know, and it was really interesting. But on the inside, I still always felt different. I still always felt anxious and like I didn't quite belong. No one actually got me, you know. I think the sad part about all of it is that now, with the work that I do, I encounter people all over the place that have had similar experiences, and understanding, and now having actually talked to some of my classmates, you know, later on, who maybe experienced some trauma when they were young too, and had similar feelings too.
Oh, interesting, but you guys never knew.
But we didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, no one talked about it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was this situation where I was probably surrounded by people, you know, including my family, who had had some similar experiences, but none of us talked about it. And it was such a missed opportunity for peer support or for normalizing those feelings.
So how long did you have these feelings of anxiety? Because you talk about having it into your adult life too, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I still live with anxiety. You know, it's not something that I don't think you cure. You know, I think, you know, mental health issues are something that you live with, you know, you learn to live with. But you know, it's ebbed and flowed over the years. You know, I've had various times when it's been extreme, like extreme panic disorder, where it was debilitating. And, you know, I remember, you know, a couple times when I was young, when I was a teenager, where, you know, there's a period where I couldn't sleep at night because there was a neighboring family who had died from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
on purpose?
No, just, it was, you know, a malfunction in their furnace. And,
Oh, God.
you know, and so their family died. And I read about it and just became almost obsessed with that, you know, fearing that was going to be something that happened to me. And so I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would have every physical symptom of carbon monoxide poisoning. I would be dizzy, nauseous, feel disoriented. There was one night I remember so vividly going up to my parents' room and, you know, knocking on the door and you know, being like, we got to get out of the house.
Wow.
You know, I have carbon monoxide poisoning, and my mom's like, I feel fine. You know, we're okay. And, you know, I was just convinced. And they prayed with me and, you know, and calmed me down, and I, you know, eventually went back to sleep. But, you know, so that was, you know, just kind of a normal thing. I remember being in class sometimes and just feeling like I was having a heart attack and having to leave, you know. But that was, you know, very much when it was unmanaged, when it was just, you know, we didn't know. But it was so debilitating that I actually stopped in my junior year of high school, stopped going to school. And I couldn't sleep at night. And I got to the point where everything was just so mixed up in my body that I started becoming very depressed. And I stopped eating, I stopped taking care of myself, and got to the point where I just wanted to die, where I just didn't want to exist in the world anymore. And I remember, you know, it wasn't so much like I wanted to, like, you know, take action to, like, kill myself, but it was more, I just didn't want to exist anymore. I didn't want to exist in the state where I felt so much pain all the time, and I felt like I was so different, and like I didn't belong, and like I couldn't control anything, you know? And so it was more like an apathy, you know, where I just wanted to disappear. But I was very fortunate that my mom was there, and she really recognized some of those things that she'd seen in my dad. And she was like, nope, this is not going to happen again. And so she literally picked me up and took me to the doctor. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, and saved my life. So
what did they do there? Was it a medical doctor? Or?
Yeah, it was our medical doctor, and it was, the very standard solution of antidepressants. Yeah, so I got on my first antidepressants when I was 17 years old, and the first of what would become many. At the time, they helped. They actually made me feel like not dying so much.
Yeah.
And it gave me, like as I say, like I saw like a pinprick of light at the end of a very, very long tunnel, but it was a little bit of hope, and it was enough to kind of keep me going, But the side effects from those meds were so bad that it was kind of almost as bad as the depression itself.
You hear that sometimes. Yeah. Can I ask what they were for you?
Yeah. So the first one that I was on was Paxil, and so we went back and got on, I think, Wellbutrin next, and that helped, but there were still other side effects. So we went back, and I think maybe Zoloft, and then went back, and over the next 6 years or so, I saw a half a dozen different doctors, including psychiatrists, and ended up getting prescribed everything from Ambien to Wellbutrin. At one point, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and they gave me Depakote. So
has that been reversed? You said
yeah,
they diagnosed me then, but
we think it was a misdiagnosis because like I said, now I manage without any medication, and
So you're medication drug free now?
Yep, yeah, for about 10 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but yeah, during that time it was 33 total different combinations of pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
And and again, like some of them helped, but they didn't fix the problem. And that was, I think, the culture that's starting to really change is, you can't just pop a pill. There's no like one pill, solution for this stuff, So once I started really investing in my own wellness, that's when things started to change, But before, when it was just a, this quick fix, type approach, no, it didn't do it.
So what made you want to start making this change into more holistic recovery?
Well, so I think I had to get to the bottom before I could start to go back up. So part of that process for me was, when the drugs, the pharmaceuticals didn't work, I started doing my own self-treatment with alcohol and other drugs. I was drinking every day, smoking every day, indiscriminate sex. I mean, like basically anything, risk-taking behavior, like high risk-taking behavior, anything that I could do to make myself feel better, So I almost, kind of took that anxiety and I used it as fuel to go and do some really stupid stuff, and that was my life for a long time. I worked in the bar industry, and
oh, that probably didn't help.
It did not help at all. It was an environment that was just not mentally healthy for me.
Yeah.
Like I said, the inverse schedule of going to bed at sunrise, waking up at like noon.
Yeah, we were talking about before the shoot started. Yeah. Like now you say you have your whole pre-bedtime routine, and then you wake up early. I try to do the same now, but when you're working in the restaurant industry, it's almost impossible.
It really is, and and then coupled with the fact that the culture of the restaurant industry is such that, you know, you just like, you often drink during work, or you go out to drink after work and you unload, and, you know, a lot of people smoke, and the food that you have access to is not healthy, right? And then, you know, you have a circadian rhythm that's completely flipped on its head. You know, all of that coupled together is just a recipe for disaster. In fact, you know, that's something that I've really been interested in and been talking with a few friends about, is creating some type of programming or some type of support for people in the hospitality industry, because it can be such a toxic environment, you know?
Well, it's so fun because we were literally saying, like, because I used to work in the restaurant industry too, and it's like it wasn't even a bar that closed at 2, so it wasn't even that bad. But it's like I would look at people that would wake up. I was saying at 5, 6, even 7. And I'm like, I don't know how on earth they do that. Like that's not something I could do. It's not something I'll ever be able to do. And now that is more of my life now. It's like, oh my God, I don't know how I did it before. You know? Like we were saying, like, getting to bed before 11 was early. I was like, wow, I'm going to bed really early today.
I seriously, like, midnight was my thing, and like I said, I had a serious case of FOMO. Like, I'm gonna miss out on something if I go to bed early. Like, what fun could I be having? You know, part of that is youth, right? Part of that's being like in your early 20s and your mid 20s, and just, you know, being in that mode in your life. You know, having more energy in general. But I tell you what, I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go back.
Oh no, I mean, well, I think and especially when it's an everyday thing, then you start developing that as a habit. And I think that's, at least for me, like, well, I'm so grateful I don't do that anymore, because that it's difficult to break. It took a good several months, if not a year, to really break that and feel comfortable not in that cycle anymore. And you know, some people are in that for years and years and decades. And especially, I mean, we're talking about this in context of you had anxiety and you had depression, so I can't even imagine this type of lifestyle on top of that.
It was definitely harmful for me, you know. And well, you know, I think, where do you go from there, right? Where do you go if you're not actually addressing the issues, if you're not addressing the anxiety and the depression, and you're just masking, constantly, you know, putting a Band-Aid on it? It's not sustainable. You know, it's a recipe for disaster. And that's, you know, what ended up happening for me, is I did hit rock bottom. And for me, that was in the form of what later was a charge of malicious destruction of property.
What do you mean?
I was, well, you know, like I said, I had these anger issues from when I was a kid, and they really went unaddressed. And so there was a situation where my girlfriend at the time was in an altercation, and I was very upset about it. But my way of dealing with it was to throw a brick through someone's windshield.
Oh, wow.
And it was because of the damages and the nature of it, I got charged with felony and convicted, and I spent a night in jail, and I had to spend several years paying restitution and going down to the Cook County Jail in Chicago on the South Side, and seeing a probation officer every week for a long time. So that was kind of a big sign for me that something had to change, and that, you know, those anger issues and that anxiety was not getting me to a place, because I was seeing my life was eerily familiar to my dad's, and I was headed down a very similar road, you know. I think what's really interesting about that time, though, is it was when I also felt the most connected to him, because I I finally understood a little bit of what he must have been going through. I understood what it was like to feel angry all the time and to feel misunderstood and to feel compelled to drink or to, do something to help take care of that. I understood what it felt like to want to die. And in that way and in that time, I kind of started to begin to forgive him, because having been there myself, I understood that it wasn't because of weakness, it wasn't because of selfishness. He was just in a lot of pain, and that's what he knew. That was his default, So in that way, I kind of got closer to him during that time. But I also recognized the fact that I did not want to go that way, if for no other reason, because I didn't want to put my family through that.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.